Right, but the United States has used the military option before. Let me bring in Abdelhamid here. Abdelhamid, the United States used the military option in Iraq, in Afghanistan, destroyed two countries, hundreds of thousands of people killed. So in a sense, is Donald Trump following a well-trodden path here?
No, I think using nuclear weapons is something totally different. I mean, the speech was unexpected to go that far. I mean, during the height of the Cold War, we never heard these speeches calling to obliterate a whole country from the face of earth. I mean, that reminds me even of the 1960 speech of Khrushchev when he took his shoe and started banging on the table. But to threaten to obliterate a whole country, this is unprecedented in the United Nations. However, I mean, the threat of using force, it could be possible. But also, I mean, these kind of threats might put pressure more on diplomats to work a little bit harder to find a diplomatic solution to the crisis between North Korea and the international community. I mean, the conflict is not only between North Korea and the United States, but between North Korea and the whole world. There is unanimity here and at the United Nations that Korea should denuclearize. They should give up their nuclear program. However, they will not give it for free. They need something. They need to see a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, the talks, the six-party talks, which started in the 1990s, it was fruitful. It gave some good results. It was a model of reaching an agreement with your foe. And it worked for many years. And it was, when it was annulled by the United States, North Korea in 2006, they resumed their nuclear activities. Would there be a chance again? I think there is. With the help of a country like China and Russia and other countries, I think there must be a diplomatic breakthrough from this difficult crisis.
All right, Trita, I want to get back to Donald Trump's threat to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it.
So very tough words there from Donald Trump. If the United States pulls out of that deal and says we're no longer part of this, and the United States, we have to remember, is not the only signatory to that deal. As you just pointed out a moment ago, it was the P5+1 and Iran. If the U.S. pulls out, then what?
Well, if the U.S. pulls out, first of all, U.S. will be at fault, and it will be the one bearing the cost of having destroyed this deal. A deal that, incidentally, is not only welcomed by the entire international community, with the exception of Israel and Saudi Arabia, but it was also adopted and passed by the UN Security Council unanimously. So this has very, very strong international support. This is not picking a fight with Iran or it's the Iranian government. It's picking a fight with Russia, with China, with France, with the UK, with Germany, with everyone that was involved in this very, very lengthy and quite exhausting process to be able to reach this deal. This was an amazing achievement rather than being an embarrassment, because here you had an international conflict that was on the verge of a military confrontation being resolved peacefully without a single shot or a single angry 4 a.m. tweet being fired. Usually you see diplomacy coming in after there's been a military confrontation. This time it came in before, and it prevented a conflict. So for the United States to do so, it will isolate itself. Will the deal be able to survive without the U.S.? That is a big question mark, because if the U.S. pulls out and starts reimposing sanctions on other countries, meaning that European companies would be sanctioned once again, mindful of their trade with Iran, then I think it would be very difficult to get this deal to survive.
Right, but just to be sure, if the U.S. pulls out, the other countries who are signatories to this deal are under no obligation to reimpose sanctions.
They are not, but what the U.S. does, that is, passes laws for the entire world. So it punishes other countries if they are trading with Iran. it excludes them from financial transactions in the international financial system. So it's not whether the U.S. would impose sanctions on its own companies. The U.S. hardly has any trade with Iran, but it would target the companies of other Western powers, etc. And if they cannot be protected, then there's a high likelihood that the Iranians will not get the economic benefit of being in compliance. And if they're not getting the benefit of being in compliance, chances are they're going to stop being in compliance.
Hugh, what is your view on this? Where is President Trump going with this? He wants to pull out, and we don't know what he wants to do next. What happens next if he pulls out of that deal?
We need to see in October if, in fact, we can certify that the Iranians are indeed in compliance. I've heard over months that they haven't been in compliance in various measures, some by the letter of the law and many by the spirit of the law, and I have to disagree with the previous speaker. There is a spirit that undergirds every agreement, every gathering at the United Nations or elsewhere, and when that spirit isn't honored, we can tell, and we know that there is a break of spirit on the Iranian side. I heard today the Iranians claimed that the U.S. wasn't complying with the deal. Now, we should ask ourselves, what's their game plan? Are they trying to get out of the deal as a result as well? We heard an earlier speaker also talk about the need to take this to the American people. And I have to regretfully say that under President Obama, he did not take this to the American people. He did not provide the U.S. Senate an opportunity to look at this treaty or agreement. Under our Constitution, the Senate has that role. Similarly, he didn't put to the American people the DACA or the Paris Climate Agreement. Those rightfully should have gone to the people at some point. So we're inheriting a bit of a problem in the United States of agreements that don't live beyond a certain presidency because, in fact, they were never subject to legal and legislative review.
Trita?
Well, I think to say that we have to wait and see whether Iran is in compliance, yes, by October, there might be an additional report, but let's not for a second pretend as if Iran hasn't been in compliance. The body that is the ultimate authority on this is the IAEA. They have issued 8 reports pointing out that Iran is in compliance. I hear a lot of people supporting Trump administration going out on the airwaves and saying it's a question mark and we don't know and they have violated this and that. Well, where are those violations? And why hasn't the IAEA been able to identify those? Moreover, if there is a spirit that the Iranians are violating, why isn't President Trump explaining what that spirit is? All he's talking about is that he disagrees with Iran's regional policies. And that's actually a very fair point. There's a lot of regional policies that Iran is engaged in that are quite objectionable from an American perspective. But they are not part of the deal, nor are they part of the spirit of the deal. This is a word game in which the United States is trying to get out of this deal for reasons that are not clear and trying to shift the blame onto the Iranians.
Okay, Hugh, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that very quickly because I want to move on.
Well, as I say, if there is no ability for us to certify the terms of this deal in October, then we will be reverting to this topic right now. Let us wait and see how we assess the, so to speak, compliance.
Right. So far we've
steadfast that it's
right. So far we've seen no violations. We're going to have to wait and see, as you point out. I want to move on. Qinduo, there was also a warning to China in Trump's speech. Let's take a listen to what President Trump had to say.
We must reject threats to sovereignty from the Ukraine to the South China Sea. We must uphold respect for law, respect for borders, and respect for culture, and the peaceful engagement these allow.
So there we heard it again, Qinduo, those words, sovereignty, South China Sea, China. What will Beijing think of that?
Well, yes, we have been seeing Trump administration is strengthening the so-called freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea area. But of course, from the Chinese side, I think China does not like to confront the U.S. Warships in the South China Sea directly. But probably it will do is to maintain the situation in a peaceful manner, let's say. There might be, I think, two sides at the same time. They do want to avoid any instance in the South China Sea because that won't be in interest for the two nations. But at the same time, I understand the U.S. will continue to go on with this, operation, freedom navigation operation. But at the same time, China will continue to uphold its national interests, its, territorial integrity and sovereignty over there. This will be going on for some time.
Abdelhamid, do you get a sense that we are approaching another Iraq moment right now, that the United States appears to have made up its mind that Iran is in violation of that nuclear deal and that we could have a confrontation here?
I truly don't believe so. I think military confrontation with Iran is a far-fetched scenario. I don't see it coming soon. I don't see it coming in the future. I mean, there is international consensus here that this is a great deal. It has diffused a crisis that was at one moment possibly to break into confrontation. Not anymore. I mean, even the partner of the United States don't see it. I mean, President Macron today in his press conference, we asked him about that, and he said he disagrees with the United States the way he saw it. The many countries around the world think that this is a good deal. It was approved by the U.S. legislature. It was approved by the American people. If there is something to criticize this deal, it should take it to the professional body that is monitoring the compliance of Iran, which is the IAEA. It's not left to Trump or to anyone to decide who is violating this agreement. I mean, yes, a country like Saudi Arabia trying to push the Trump administration to confront with Iran, same thing with Israel, but I don't see it reaching that point where there will be military confrontation. I think the Middle East had enough problems not to add another devastating war where the United States is a partner of that devastation war.
Trita, there was a very small bit of response from Iran to what the president had to say. It came in the form of a tweet again. This came from Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, in which he said, Trump's ignorant hate speech belongs in medieval times, not the 21st century, UN, unworthy of a reply. But what would the Iranians be thinking about this? Would they be looking at perhaps engaging with the United States again?
I hope there ultimately is engagement, because none of this is going to be resolved unless there is diplomacy. But I am very, very worried about several different things. First of all, that the atmosphere has now been so poisoned that it's going to be much, much more difficult. That the United States is now lacking so much of credibility to actually be able to be an effective negotiating partner for the rest of the EU and the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, the U.S.'s credibility is extremely important, and a president that behaves like this, that is constantly threatening to withdraw from agreements, doesn't, really inject a lot of confidence into the situation. But also, I'm quite concerned about the competence and the capacity of the United States to actually be able to engage in such complex negotiations as these were. Ultimately, diplomacy is going to be needed, but mindful of how the Trump administration has handled the situation so far, I'm quite worried.
May I speak?
May I jump in?
Okay, Hugh, you go first, and then Qinduo, I'll come to you.
Okay, I take great exception as to whether the United States has the capacity to negotiate this or any international agreement, given our track record and our proven ability to engage the world. The fact is, nobody else has raised this at the UN in a diplomatic setting as plainly and directly as has the United States. We have clearly taken that diplomatic option, that initiative. Right. Thank you.
Trita, quickly.
Yes, the United States, of course, played a critical role in getting this deal, but that was under a different administration that actually staffed its State Department, that actually supported its diplomat. That's not the situation we have today.
Right. Qinduo, you want to say something?
Well, I think if the U.S. withdraw from this Iranian deal, the U.S. would be again isolating itself, from the international community, especially with the big powers, China, Russia, France, Britain and Germany. All of these countries are against the withdrawal of the from the deal, because so far the Iranians have been following this deal very strictly. There's nothing. I don't think there's good excuse to withdraw. And secondly, this deal somehow could be used as an example to solve this North Korean nuclear issue. If this deal fails, it again probably gives North Korean another reason not to trust the United States.
Right. Abdelhamid, I'm wondering what is the broader message that this would send to the world if the United States pulls out? I mean, would other countries say, well, look, we're not bound to agreements that previous administrations have signed. We can pull out anytime we want to. I mean, are we going to get to the stage where agreements are not going to be worth the paper they're written on? Yeah?
That will encourage other countries not to abide by agreements. I mean, especially with the climate change. And the president today avoided mentioning climate change. People were waiting for him to say something about the climate change, which has a universal agreement or universal support. And he avoided this whole issue together, threatening to withdraw from agreement that has been reached not by the United States alone, but by its partner. It's a 5+1. So it will give a message to the world that this world is an anarchy, and any country can dictate its own terms, especially as he talked about the supremacy of the national security of this country that will dictate his policies. I mean, he might be in trouble at home, and the United States will be also isolated at the international level as well.
Okay, Abdelhamid Siyam, Hugh Dugan, Trita Parsi, and Qinduo Xu, thanks to all of you for being with us.